The boy arrived on a gray horse, his boots too big and his hat too wide. The wind dragged dust across his cheeks, and he didn't flinch when it stung. No one knew where he came from. They just saw the badge glinting on his chest like a dare and laughed. "Hell, Sheriff's just a child," said Greeley Clay as he leaned against the rail of the saloon porch, spitting dark juice into the dirt. Behind him, half the town watched, their eyes shining with the same cruel amusement that rolls off men when they smell weakness. They all laughed, even the schoolmarm, even the undertaker. It sounded like something broken being stepped on. The boy didn't speak. He tied the reins to the post outside the jailhouse, walked up the 3 creaking steps, and unlocked the door. His back was straight, his shoulders narrow as a pine rail, and his hands moved like they'd been taught where to rest, right near the gun. Nobody stopped him. That first day passed quiet. But on the second day, old Milt found a man hanged outside the tannery with a sign pinned to his chest, "Raped a girl too young to name." Folks asked questions then, but none too loudly. No one claimed to have seen the boy do it. Still, no one else had dared even arrest the bastard when he was alive. The boy didn't blink when they asked, just looked at them until their words slowed, then dried up. Greeley spat again. Kids don't clean up towns, they make messes. The bodies started stacking slow. The boy wore the same expression each time. He'd kneel by the corpse, read the sin on the chest card, and say nothing. His silence spread like black mold. By the second week, the laughter had thinned. By the third, it died. No one had seen him fire his gun, not yet. But death didn't need witnesses. It just needed time. By autumn, the stories had grown longer than the roads. Folks from neighboring towns came to peek at the sheriff boy like he was some painted freak in a medicine show. He never smiled, never drank, never left the jailhouse after dark. They said he slept on the cot by the cell door with his boots on. His gun belt hung on the knob, and the air around him cold as river bone. Reverend Bell tried to talk sense to him. "Son, you need guidance, you need scripture." The boy handed him a book of his own, a ledger. Inside were names, dates, a column for crimes, a column for punishment. Bell flipped through it and went pale. There were blanks at the bottom, dozens. "You're keeping score," Bell said, voice strangled. The boy looked up. "No, I'm making it even." Bell never came back. Every town has its Boyle. For Widow's Mercy, it was the Crowder brothers, Jade, Hank, and Levi, born drunk and mean in the hills, stained with blood before their voices cracked. They run whiskey, slaves, and knives through the valley for 20 years. Not even the Pinkertons touched them. Judges trembled at their names. Sheriffs disappeared. When the boy put their names in the ledger, the town gasped. "That ain't law," said Sheriff Brannick, the last living badge in the county. The boy didn't argue. He just walked into the woods one morning before dawn, carrying a sack and a shovel. He returned alone at dusk, the sack empty, the shovel stained. 3 nights later, Hank Crowder was found gutted and hung upside down in his own barn. The next week, Levi went missing. Jade came into town drunk and howling for blood. He dragged the schoolteacher's son out into the street and pointed a shotgun at the boy's head. "Come out, Sheriff, or I'll repaint the dirt with this kid's brains." The jailhouse door creaked open. The boy walked out slow, hands at his side. "You shoot me," Jade snarled, "you die. I've got 30 men behind me." The boy nodded once, "Then I'll kill 31. Jade laughed, "You ain't but a baby." The boy's hand moved. The shot took Jade Crowder's left eye, the bullet exiting behind the right. He collapsed like a dropped puppet, the gun still cocked in his hand. The kid holstered the weapon and turned around. Behind him, the air was quiet. No gunmen stepped forward. The town watched him walk back inside. By winter, nobody laughed. The saloon played its piano soft and slow. Greeley Clay stopped spitting and started praying. The boy's ledger filled page after page, a history written not in ink but in who was still breathing. He never aged, not really, not in the eyes of the town. He stayed 17, sallow-cheeked, tight-lipped, the kind of youth God forgot to soften, but his eyes aged. They darkened, like they'd stopped looking out and started looking through. Some said he was an orphan from the massacre in Blood Hollow. Others whispered he'd died and clawed his way out of the grave. A few believed he was born of a wrong woman and a darker man, made of vengeance and cinder smoke. No one knew the truth, and no one dared ask. Then came the Bexley gang. They heard of the boy sheriff and thought it sport. 10 men on horses with laughter like thunder and pistols made for carnage. They rode in after sundown, whooping like devils and firing at chimneys. "Where's your little lawdog?" the leader called. "We've come to break his teeth." No answer came. They shot out the windows of the general store. They burned the schoolhouse. "Thought this town had a killer child," another man sneered. "We just got cowards." At midnight, the church bell rang once. The gang turned to look. From the black mouth of the jailhouse, the boy walked out. He didn't speak, he just pointed his revolver. The first man to laugh took a round through the heart. And then the silence screamed. He moved like a thing cut from wind, always ahead of where he should be. The snow took blood like it had been hungry for it. One by one, the Bexleys fell. Some tried to flee. None did. The last one begged on his knees, hands shaking like leaves in a storm. The boy stared down at him, eyes hollow as a bullet wound. "You thought it was funny," he said, voice like stone dragged through gravel. The man nodded, whimpering. Then died smiling. The shot rang out, and the night resumed its stillness. The next morning the town found 10 corpses in the square, mouths slit into ragged grins, eyes glassy with terror. The laughter never returned. Only the legend did, and it grew like rot. Winter gripped Widow's Mercy by the throat. Snow rose like plague breath along the eaves, thick and deadening. No trains came, no wagons passed. The telegraph line snapped under ice, and no one climbed the pole to fix it. The boy sheriff stayed inside the jailhouse, pale as the frost that laced its windows. But the killing did not stop. They found Josiah Finch hanging from the bridge trestle, his tongue missing and his boots filled with gravel. A sign pinned to his coat said traitor. He'd been seen whispering to a stranger in a long gray coat the day before. No one remembered the stranger's face, just the stench of river mud. The town buried Josiah without ceremony. By then the kid was more than sheriff, he was reckoning. The gallows didn't stand in Widow's Mercy anymore. It had been taken down plank by plank, burned in the woods, no need for it. Justice came quieter now. He no longer wrote names in the ledger. The book sat closed on the shelf, leather cracking from the cold. When asked, he'd say, "The guilty write themselves." They believed him. His name was Elias before it all, a boy born with nothing, raised on silence. No last name worth carving on a headstone. His mother died in a sod house near the Devil's Tooth Ridge, half mad from fever, her eyes turned inward as if watching her own death from inside. He remembered her singing to herself with no tune at all. A preacher had taken him in after that, a man called Harlow with blood on his boots and mercy in his brandy. Harlow taught Elias how to shoot a snake at 10 paces, how to read a man's lie from the weight of his smile, and how every sin costs more the second time it's made. Harlow had been hung upside down and lit on fire by raiders near the Colorado border. Elias found what was left of him, buried him in the same dirt Harlow once called holy. He never prayed again. By spring, the river thawed, and with it came the riders. They didn't wear gang colors or bounty stripes. These were polished men, clean coats, leather gloves. Government men, they said, though no one could say from which branch. Their eyes were slow and flat and didn't match their faces. They didn't ask for the sheriff. They demanded him. When the boy came out to meet them, they spoke his name, the real one, the one no one in town knew. He did not deny it. "We know what you've done," said the man with the waxed mustache. The boy stood still, the wind pressing his coat flat against his ribs. "You're wanted in 5 territories, not for murder, for treason, for knowledge you weren't meant to carry." The boy blinked once, slow. "You should have died at 7 Knives. You were marked for disposal." The townspeople gathered behind the jailhouse porch, listening without understanding. 7 Knives was just a name on a map, burned years ago, a military project, they'd said, then silence. The boy's voice came soft. "I remember the tunnels. That unsettled the waxed man. He gestured, "We can erase it, all of it, if you come with us." The boy stepped down from the porch and walked past them. The men followed, confused. He led them to the graveyard. Snow melted in hunched patches between the markers. He stopped beside a stone so worn the name had vanished. "They buried my mother here," he said. "Under this, but I remember where." The men shifted, impatient. "You want me to forget?" the boy said, drawing the gun. "You can't," the waxed man muttered, raising a hand. "You don't understand what they'll do to all of us if—" The boy fired. The man's jaw split and he fell backward into the mud. The other two went for weapons, but the boy had already moved. One bullet caught a throat. The other spun the last man sideways, his scream biting the air before it stopped cold. It took 15 seconds. When it was over, he holstered the gun and looked at the town. "They weren't from any government that keeps people safe," he said. Nobody questioned him. No one asked about 7 knives again. Later that summer, he started walking the perimeter of the town every night, boots thudding like a metronome against dirt paths. He stopped only to stare at fences, windows, rooftops, always listening, as if waiting for a sound only he could hear. He began setting traps, iron jaws hidden in dry creek beds, spikes buried in hay bales, rusted blades strung with wire behind the stable. When the schoolteacher asked him why, he stared past her and said, "Because they aren't done." She didn't ask who. And then the children started disappearing. The first was Mary Cobbler, age 8, vanished walking from school to home. Her mother found a torn ribbon at the edge of the well. The second was Jacob Hewlin, 12, gone from his bed in the middle of the night. A patch of hair left on the windowsill, matted with dried sap. The third was never found at all, just the blood drag across the front porch and the father's screams when he woke to an empty cradle. The town cracked open. Men took to wandering the streets with rifles, mothers stayed locked behind doors, and the boy watched. He found the trail by the edge of the river, thin footprints, drag marks, feathers, not bird feathers, long, black, coated in a sheen that shivered in the sunlight. He followed it to the canyon line, where the cliffs folded like broken teeth. At the edge he found a satchel. Inside, a bone flute carved with symbols older than the country. He took it back to the jailhouse and stared at it until night fell. Then he burned it. The wind that night howled like something trying to speak. The next morning, Greeley Clay was found sitting upright in the church pews, eyes open, heart stopped. A single word was carved into the back of his hand: laughed. The boy stood over him for a long while, then turned and nailed shut every window in the jailhouse. The darkness was coming again. And this time it wasn't wearing boots. The rain began without warning. No thunder, no clouds, just a thin, cold drizzle that fell straight down and soaked through clothes like breath through a dying mouth. It didn't stop for 5 days. And in those 5 days, the last of Widow's Mercy turned inward, doors locked, curtains drawn, even the saloon boarded its windows. The piano was silent, the streets emptied. Only the boy sheriff walked the roads. He wore no coat, the badge on his chest had dulled to a rusted disc. His boots sank into the mud with every step, and behind him the wind carried a sound no one dared name. Not animal, not man, not quite either. People whispered now, not because they feared being overheard, but because they feared being understood. On the 6th day, a stranger arrived. He came on foot, barefoot, wearing a stitched-together coat that looked like it had been flayed from different animals, and maybe men. His skin was the color of storm ash, mottled with bruises old enough to have stories. His eyes were pale, too pale, like milk poured into grave dirt. And when he opened his mouth to speak, his voice came in a tongue no one had heard since the ancient things were buried. But the boy sheriff understood him. He met the stranger outside the blacksmith's husk, beneath a sky clogged with rotting clouds. They stared at each other for what felt like an hour, not a word between them. Then the stranger raised a hand and pointed at the town. "You broke the chain," the boy said, voice hoarse from disuse. "I sealed the bloodline. I burned the book." The stranger tilted his head, lips splitting into a wide, wet smile. No, the boy said, almost a whisper. I killed you. That smile didn't fade, it stretched wider. And then the stranger vanished. Not in a blink, not in a puff. He simply wasn't there anymore. The boy staggered back and looked down. The mud where the man had stood was crawling with black slugs. They twisted together in spirals and hissed when the rain hit them. He drew his revolver and fired into the ground. The slugs exploded like eggs. He returned to the jailhouse and opened the hidden drawer behind the cot. Inside was a second gun, older, ornate. The handle carved from bone, not animal, not human, something in between. Its barrel bore symbols in a language he had sworn never to say aloud again. He holstered it, then lit a lantern and began carving marks into the walls of the jail. Not crosses, not runes, something deeper. Every cut into the wood made his eyes bleed. He didn't flinch. He was running out of time. 3 nights later, the town bell rang by itself. It was midnight. No one had touched the rope. They came out then, the last of them, the ones who hadn't fled to the hills. 23 souls, hunched in rain-soaked coats, gathered at the square. The boy stood on the steps of the jailhouse. Behind him, the darkness pulsed like something alive. They're not men, he said, pointing to the shadows crawling in the alleys. They're what we made when we forgot the price. Someone stepped forward. It was Mrs. Harrow, whose son vanished in spring. What are they? She asked, voice breaking. The boy looked down at his hands. They used to be us. When the wind rose again, it carried screams. Not fresh, old, worn and brittle like they'd been trapped underground too long. They came from the wells, from the chimney pipes, from beneath floorboards. People began to run. The shapes followed. They had mouths too wide, teeth too many, skin that flickered like pages of a book on fire. They walked with broken limbs but never fell. The boy fired. Each shot from the bone-handled gun turned one to ash, but only one, and there were dozens. He reloaded with bullets black as coal. Another fell. Then he was moving, cutting through alleys, pulling townsfolk behind him, shouting names like a death roll. He led them to the old stable, now fortified with iron doors and salt-lined beams. They packed in tight, crying, praying, whispering apologies to no one in particular. The boy stayed outside. The pastor tried to stop him. You can't fight them alone. The boy didn't look back. I already did once, I just didn't finish the job. And then he walked into the dark. What happened that night only the land remembers. But they say the earth itself went silent. No insects, no animals, no wind. Just firelight flickering against the canyon walls, and a sound like bones being chewed wet. The next morning, the sun rose on a quiet town. The shapes were gone, the screams were gone. So was the boy. All that remained was the jailhouse, its door swinging open, the bone-handled gun resting on the step. The ledger sat beside it. It had only one word written on the last page. Almost. The town buried its dead, rebuilt its fences. But it never laughed again, not even the children. Something in them had been broken, or maybe shown. The sheriff's badge was mounted on the church wall, next to a photo of the boy, though none had ever been taken, and no one remembered where the picture came from. His face was smudged, his eyes scratched out. Visitors came over the years, drawn by the legend. They left fast. Sometimes they spoke of laughter in the hills. Laughter that didn't stop. Laughter with too many voices in it. The town changed after that, not at once but like rot in the beams of a house, quiet, patient, certain. Widow's Mercy didn't vanish from the maps, but it may as well have. Roads to it became impassable, trains rerouted. Even the birds stopped flying overhead. The children born after that night never spoke before age 5. When they finally did, it was in dreams or in voices not their own. Some claimed the town itself was cursed. Others said it was hollowed, like a wasp's nest after the swarm moved on. But those who'd been there knew better. The town wasn't cursed. It was watched. 22 years passed. The war came and went, new borders drawn in the blood of boys, horses replaced by engines. Towns grew up into cities and out into steel skeletons, but not widow's mercy. It remained a blister on the map, unchanged, unrepaired. A place people avoided without knowing why. Then one morning in late October, long after the world had stopped asking questions about that place, a rider appeared. Not young, not old. His eyes were slate-colored and heavy, and his coat bore the dust of 100 roads. No one recognized him, because no one had seen him grow. But they knew. The badge was gone from the church wall. The photograph, too. And the jailhouse door, once nailed shut, stood open again. The boy had returned. Only now he was a man, though his face didn't carry years the way others did. His jaw was harder, his gaze more distant, but something else had changed. He no longer looked like vengeance. He looked like memory. He didn't speak to anyone that first week, just moved through town like a shadow checking its own shape. He walked the cemetery, the schoolhouse, the site of the old stable, now collapsed into itself. The townsfolk watched him from behind curtains and worn wooden blinds. They didn't cheer. They didn't welcome him. They didn't breathe too loud. When he finally did speak, it was at the edge of town to a boy named Jonas Witt. Jonas had no father, never had. He was small for his age, always carrying a knife too large for his hand. "You dig graves," the man said. Jonas nodded. "Good," the man said. "You'll need to." The wind changed that night, turned warm, unnatural, like breath from something just woken up beneath the soil. The sky turned reddish-black and the moon vanished without explanation. In the distance, coyotes began howling, but it wasn't hunger in their cry. It was warning. And the next day, the riders came. Not like the Bexleys, not laughing men with guns. These rode pale horses with eyes covered in cloth. Their boots didn't touch the stirrups. Their faces were blank, not masked. Blank skin pulled smooth where eyes and mouth should be. They didn't stop at the town's edge. They rode straight to the church and dismounted as one. The man was already waiting. He stood in the street, both guns holstered, hands open. "You waited long enough," he said. The riders didn't speak, but the air around them screamed. Then they moved. The fight didn't look like a fight, not at first. There were no bullets, no shouts, just the man walking forward and the riders trying to stop him. Each one who touched him dissolved. Not burned, not torn. They simply fell into ash like their shape had been borrowed too long and finally called back. But for every rider that fell, something else took its place. From behind them came the children. The ones who'd vanished. Unaged, unblinking, eyes like broken glass. Mary Cobbler walked with her wrists limp, dragging a porcelain doll behind her. Jacob Hewlin marched with blood crusted around his lips. The cradle child scuttled like an animal bent backward, teeth grown long as knives. They weren't human anymore. But they weren't gone. The town stood frozen. Then Jonas stepped forward. He looked at the man, trembling, but didn't run. "Tell me what to do," he said. The man looked down at him with something close to sorrow. "You already know." Jonas nodded and began digging. What followed was not a battle. It was exorcism. The man faced each of the lost, whispered something only they could hear, and then placed his hand to their chest. One by one they wept ash and collapsed, not screaming, not fighting, just relief. It was the riders who resisted. When the last child fell, the riders circled, wailing in a language older than anything carved on stone. Their horses burst into flame. The dirt cracked beneath them. The church bell rang without wind. And the man reached for the bone-handled gun. The first shot split the silence wide. The second called the lightning. The third opened the earth. Each pull of the trigger was an unmaking. And by dawn, nothing remained but scorched prints and the scent of salt. The man collapsed in front of the church, hands shaking, skin pale. Jonas rushed to him, held his head in his lap. "Did you finish it?" Jonas asked. The man looked up at the sunrise, red as a wound. "No." What now? The man closed his eyes. Now it begins. He died there. Not in pain, but emptied. Jonas buried him in the grave he dug before the fight. No marker, just dirt packed hard and a line of salt poured in a perfect circle. The next morning, the badge was nailed to the door of the jailhouse. No one claimed it. But Jonas began to walk the streets. Boots too big, hat too wide, and in his pocket a ledger bound in leather. Empty. For now. The years passed like a knife over wet stone, slow and grinding. Widow's mercy never grew again. The soil soured. The wells deepened, but no water came. Folks lived because they didn't know where else to go. Jonah's wit, the boy who buried the man, was no longer a boy. He wore the badge, but not on his chest. He kept it in his pocket, close to his skin, as if it were a wound he couldn't let scab over. He didn't call himself sheriff. He didn't need to. Jonas walked the town each morning, as the man once had. Past the hollow church, past the schoolhouse where no children played, down to the southern fence line where the mist clung like old fingers. He had his own ledger now, blank pages for a long time. Then one day names began to appear, not written by his hand, but they're just the same. He never questioned it, he only waited. Justice, he'd learned, doesn't run, it roots. It festers until the blood comes again. And it always does. One night during the blood moon harvest, 3 men rode in from the west. They wore old war coats, high boots, and eyes like frostbite, numb and starved. They weren't outlaws. Outlaws had fear. These men didn't. They didn't tie their horses. They walked into the saloon, sat at a table no one used, and called for whiskey. The barkeep, now blind in one eye from the last time darkness visited, poured without asking. The tallest of the men looked around and said, "We heard a child ran this town once." The barkeep nodded, quiet. "That child's still sheriff." "No," the barkeep said, "he's dead." The second man grinned. "Then there's no law left." They laughed. It was the first real laughter heard in Widow's Mercy in a decade. It died quick. Jonas walked in through the swinging doors, coat heavy, eyes darker than coal. "I'll need your names," he said, voice flat. The third man leaned back, boots on the table. "We don't give our names to servants." Jonas didn't speak, just stepped forward and laid the ledger on the bar. The pages turned themselves. 3 names burned into the paper like brands on flesh. The men stopped laughing. Jonas opened his coat. No pistol, just a shovel. One of the men stood, sneering. "You think you're going to bury us with that?" "No," Jonas said. "You buried yourselves long ago." He swung once. The shovel caved in the man's face like a melon gone soft. The others went for their guns, but the saloon twisted, the walls stretched, the floor buckled. Widow's Mercy wasn't made of wood and nail anymore. It was memory, and the town remembered what men like these had done. They screamed as the bar splintered into ash. They screamed as the mirrors showed them not themselves, but every face they'd ever hurt. They screamed until the sound folded inward and bled into silence. Jonas picked up the ledger. 3 names crossed out. Justice done. That winter the snow returned, not the soft kind, but the heavy white that smothered, the kind that didn't melt so much as vanish. The townsfolk stayed close to their fires. Some tried to leave. None succeeded. The roads always circled back. No matter the path, they came home. They started to say things again. That the boy sheriff had cursed them. That Jonas had taken his place. That the town was a mouth and it needed feeding. Jonas heard these things and said nothing. But he kept the ledger close. It was the spring of the flood when the woman arrived. She was older than she looked, scar across her temple, rifle on her back. She rode a mule instead of a horse and spoke with a voice that made people want to listen. She asked for Jonas. He met her in the jailhouse. She looked him over and nodded once. "You carry it," she said. Jonas didn't answer. I carried it once, she added, pulling back her sleeve. A burn in the shape of a badge stained her wrist. She opened a pouch and laid out 6 bullets. Bone white, no markings. There for what's left, she said, below the jail. Jonas didn't ask questions. He took them. That night he pried open the trapdoor beneath the cot, the same one the man had slept on, the same one no one had dared touch since. The stairs went down farther than they should have. The air changed, got wetter, older. Jonas lit a lantern and walked into the dark. The first chamber was filled with whispers. The second was filled with bones. The third held a mirror. Not a true one, it didn't show his reflection. It showed the boy sheriff. 17, pale, tired. He wasn't smiling, but his eyes had softened. Jonas touched the glass. It rippled like water, and the last bullet in the chamber glowed in his hand. He placed it against the glass. "Thank you," he whispered. The boy on the other side nodded once, and vanished. Jonas climbed back up into the morning. He sealed the trapdoor, buried the badge beneath it, and locked the jail behind him. Years later, when Widow's Mercy was finally overtaken by the desert, no one remembered who'd lived there. Just a story about a boy sheriff no one believed in. A boy they laughed at, until the dying began. They said he came back from the dead, or never left. They said the badge was cursed, that the ledger still writes names. But the truth is simpler. Justice never ends. It only sleeps between teeth, and wakes when the laughter starts again.